Well, we have received the official explanation as to why Senator Jon Tester, who swore up and down for the last couple of years, yes, I'm proudly supporting the Keystone XL pipeline. Lots of jobs, good stuff, good for Montana, good for us, good for everybody.
Well,
woo!
We don't need Peter to repeat that. I actually put in the queue here.
Okay,
some of Jon Tester's actual statements.
So is this the Jon Tester ad or the
Jon
Jon
let's play
Tester?
the ad because
Okay.
this is what he was selling to us when he was campaigning.
Okay,
for
here we go.
Senate.
Here we go. This is, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Jon Tester.
Those out-of-state super PACs don't know anything about me or Montana. Let's take them on a little tour of our state.
Yeah!
I took on the Obama administration to put Montana back in charge of wolves. I voted to build the Keystone Pipeline. I voted for a balanced budget amendment. I opposed all those Wall Street bailouts and got rid of those ridiculous EPA farm dust regulations. Look across our state. I do what's best for Montana, always. I'm Jon Tester, and I approve this message.
Okay, there you go. So there's that. That was the ad.
Yeah,
Oh.
that was just one of many. I mean, we had a vote on Keystone XL back in November.
Right.
A vote in which Tester voted to pass Keystone XL.
Right.
Of course, this was back when there were enough Democrats in the Senate to make it almost impossible to do anything successful and beneficial for America. But anyway, most of those Democrats are gone now, and Senator Jon Tester is now holding the bag for everybody else.
Well, keep in mind, in addition to his duties as a senator, which keeps him pretty busy, he has also been tapped to be the chief fundraiser for the Senate re-election committee.
Those outside super PAC. Oh, crap.
Not to be,
I'm the super PAC.
Not to be confused. Hold on. No. Those were the outside evil super PACs. This is the inside friendly, we know everybody's super PACs.
The super PAC inside the Beltway and inside Montana.
That's right. And so is this the this interview with Eric Whitney?
Eric Whitney. So this is very recent. Actually, this is January 5th. This is an interview with Montana Public
This
Radio.
is a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, this is with...
that's right. He's the new head guy over at NPR.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, talking to Tester about Keystone.
Here we go.
Here's what he said then.
What's your read for whether you think President Obama is going to sign the Keystone XL bill, and do you think he's got the votes in Congress to sustain a veto if he chooses to go that route?
I don't know what he's going to do. I have not visited with him about it. He may let it go. He may veto it. I don't know that there are enough votes to override a veto, but that's a better question for folks that are in leadership to count the votes. I think there's enough votes there to get it passed. I don't know that there's enough votes to sustain a veto, but I could be wrong on that.
And I'm guessing you wouldn't be voting to sustain a veto if it comes down to that.
Well, no. I mean, I think the pipeline should be built. I think it needs to be built safely, no doubt about it. And I think that if we do this right, it could take a lot of pressure off of Middle Eastern oil. So I think there's a lot of positives that go with it. Look, there's negatives too. I mean, I know that the tar sands is one of the biggest emitter of CO2 there is. But by the same token, I think until we have the research and development out there to get us off of oil and give us other options, this is one of the options we have to do, and that's to build the pipeline.
Thank heavens that Senator Tester actually found somewhere in Missoula to be on the radio.
It's important.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, because obviously, we have not asked him to be on our show 400 times and have been turned down.
Well, Eric doesn't have kooky callers.
He doesn't have any callers. That's just it. And I think that's the attraction because Senator Tester does not like to be on our show from his aides and his staff because of our, quote, kooky callers.
But also, Tester has lots of opportunities. For example, he was recently on Huffington Post Live. Talking about Keystone XL. I have that logged in here.
Oh, we do? Okay.
And basically, he says voting against Keystone XL would hurt American oil security.
Let's get with Mr. Consistency, Senator Jon Tester.
I've supported the Keystone XL pipeline for a long time. You have voted for it. And I've got a blog pulled up here, too, from your website saying why I support the Keystone XL pipeline. And there you mention certain things like energy independence. But at the same time, and you are somebody who believes in climate change, which is wonderful when you actually have lawmakers that believe in science. But at the same time, you have scientists saying that the greenhouse gas emissions coming from getting the tar sands oil are going to be greatly increased. We also know that the oil that does flow through the pipeline once it is built, if it is built, will then be exported. So how do you actually count, how do you square your positions with the reality of what the Keystone XL pipeline will do?
A couple things, and I've got an amendment to keep the oil from the Keystone pipeline in this country to be used domestically, and I think that would be a very good amendment to get passed. It's going to be tough sledding to get it passed, but I still think it'd be a very, very good thing to get it passed. It would help with energy security in this country, which is, I think, should be our first concern.
There you
go. There you go.
Our first concern.
Yes.
Except for I'm more concerned about my party in the Senate.
Well, according to the news release that we got, he said the reason he voted against it. Okay, I just I'm trying to keep this straight. The reason he voted against it, to filibuster against it, was because he wanted to have more and better amendments to the bill so that it would be veto-proof when it finally does pass. So he voted for it, he was for it, and he voted for it, and now he's for it, but he voted against it because he's for it. I got it.
Anyway,
right.
I did get an official. I called Tester's office this
Okay.
morning to get an official statement.
Okay, well, this is I just tried to paraphrase it, but tell her what it actually says.
Okay, here's the statement.
All right.
Quote, I support building the Keystone XL pipeline. That's why we must do our job, debate this bill and make it better by increasing private property protections for landowners and ensuring pipeline safety. We have an opportunity to build enough support for this bill to override the president's veto and get his pipeline built this pipeline bill. I'm pretty sure President Obama does not want it called the Obama pipeline. Built once and for all. So there we go.
All right. So, okay, now...
I mean, can you imagine being the president and being named after a ginormous failure?
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Like people might call an entire bill like Obamacare or something.
Something like that. Yeah, something that's doing so well, too. All right, we're going to take a break.
You might be down to like 49% popularity or something like that.
We're going to take a little break. No, Sue couldn't stay with us?
No.
Okay.
She did want to tell us, though,
okay,
that Tester will be on KUFM later this week.
Great!
Taking
Wonderful.
the hard questions.
Yeah, but from nobody.
From publicly funded radio.
Yeah. All right.
That also has commercials for some reason. I still don't get that. Every time I watch PBS.
Oh, by the way, go ahead.
I get so upset. I sit down because I watch that show because my wife's addicted to it.
Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey. Yeah, we watch this show. I'm
right.
also kind of addicted to it. So we watch this show, and then I'm sitting here watching dress commercials, and they're longer than regular commercials.
Oh, yeah.
I am paying to watch more commercials. I feel like I'm getting punched in the face twice. Anyway, there's that off my chest.
Okay, all right. So 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Will we ever get John Tester back in our studio, or even just on the phone? Crickets. 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 Crickets.
I think that was a chicken.
Anyway, we're going to take a break. Come right back. All right, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Just one more thing about Senator Tester. A week or so ago, when we did the story about the choice cards, my friend Monty Turner out of the Mineral County Health Clinic.
Yeah, we spoke, I believe, briefly with Zinke about that.
Yeah.
And Zinke called in, as he regularly does.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, well, he's a Navy SEAL, so he can take it. But
Navy
anyway,
SEALs know how to operate telephones.
And anyway, and I visited with Senator Tester's staff. Okay, now, obviously, Senator's not going to answer his own phone. So I explained who I was and the fact that we had a problem, because I know the senator is very, very involved in Veterans Affairs, and to his credit, I mean, he does a great job for veterans. Good for him. God bless him. That's wonderful. And I said, would it be possible to visit with the senator just on the phone for just a few minutes regarding the choice cards? And she said, well, we'll do what we can to make it happen. We'll try to arrange it. I know he's got some free time, and he loves visiting with the folks in Montana. So, yeah, we'll do what we can.
Did she realize that in this case, choice didn't mean killing babies? It meant getting health care to veterans?
Well, you know what I mean. And I really did. If he had called, the only thing I would have asked him about was that topic, because that was the topic I promised that I would talk about. But not only did I not get a call from anybody on his staff or Senator Tester, but then I find that Senator Tester was actually in Missoula just a couple of days later. Gosh, we could have gotten together, had coffee, but I guess that wasn't in the cards. So there you go. Dave, good morning. You're on Talkback. Hi.
Yeah, I hope my radio upstairs isn't interfering with our conversation. But I wanted to know how many Senate votes were in favor of the pipeline, because I haven't yet heard that.
Look it up real quick. I'll get back to you, though.
You mean Senator Tester's votes?
No, he wants to know how many in the Senate
voted. I believe it was like 32.
I think you need more than 59.
Yeah, you have to have 60 votes
to bust the filibuster.
But so it was less than...
So only 32 people voted for the pipeline, correct?
Well, I don't know if Peter's number is right. I'm looking it up.
Peter's off.
Well, Peter's usually off, so that's
well, I can tell you
this.
this. There were 3 Democrats that voted for the pipeline in November.
Right.
Who were for the bill before they were against the bill, and it flipped over. Those three are Senator John Tester, Senator Thomas Carper of Delaware, and Robert Casey of Pennsylvania. Those 3 switched their votes from November. Now, obviously, it's a different ecosphere because now there's a Republican-controlled Senate, and there's more Republicans there. In fact, I believe in Washington, D.C. now, when President Obama was giving his speech, there were 80 more Republicans in that auditorium than when he gave his first State of the Union speech.
They were all in the House, mostly.
Yeah. A lot of them, well, yeah, of course, but there's also a lot more people in the House. But, yeah, it's a huge jump.
Okay, there's 55 Republicans in the Senate, right?
I believe so. 55
so
or 56.
How could it be 32?
Yeah, I don't think it is. Well, I'm looking it up. Sorry, it's taking me time because I keep talking to you.
Yeah. Tell you what, Dave, we'll let you...
Why don't you take a quick break?
Just announce it over the air. I'll hang up.
We will do that. Right. Thanks so much, Dave. Thanks for the call. 721-1290, 1-800. Well, I think I have it right here. So please, didn't I give that to you?
Not unless you wrote it on something. You gave me this.
We're looking. Here it is right here. I got it. Okay. Senate Democrats have temporarily stalled progress in a bill. The Senate voted 53 to 39 to cut off debate on the bill. At a procedural vote, that's short of the 60 votes needed. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants to move to pass the legislation, which has enough support. Democrats argued they needed more time to debate additions. Some Democrats who had supported previous bills approving the pipeline, i.e. Senator Tester, including one of the bill's current sponsors, helped to filibuster the move to limit debate because evidently there's things in there that they just want to fix. And they don't want it to move forward until they get a chance to get in there and tinker with it and fix it.
Well, there's a bunch of amendments. We heard Chuck Schumer, we played that clip where he talked about a bunch of amendments that he wants to throw at the bill and then said even if they had the amendments, he wouldn't vote for it. The amendments include one that I know Tester personally wants, is for all of the oil that's coming down to stay in America.
Sure.
Right. Maybe pooling under the Yellowstone River or something. But at least he wants it to stay in Montana.
No, he doesn't want to stay in Montana. He wants to stay in the US, to be sold
US,
be sold domestically, or at least a good percentage of it. All right?
Maybe they'll color code the oil red, white, and blue.
See, and you have to remember. I think one of the reasons why Senator Tester and I'm not being sarcastic at this point. Okay, I've been really sarcastic all morning, and I'm sorry. But what I have heard the senator say is that one of the benefits of having the Keystone XL pipeline, part of it running through Montana, is it will be a dropping off point for some Montana oil actually to get into the pipeline, to get down to those, which will reduce rail traffic of oil trains, which is criticized by many, with the exception of Warren Buffett, and who owns the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. But it would free up rail cars because Tester's a farmer, okay? And so he wants to see more grain cars opened up so that the grain cars can get to market. They have, because of the massive amount of coal and oil that's been shipped by rail, less has been shipped, or less grain and foodstuffs have been shipped by rail. So I think what he's thinking is if we can get it into the pipeline, then that'll free up rail and it will help agriculture. It will help everybody. So I applaud that. That's good. Okay?
Well, that would be smart, yeah.
So anyway.
Okay, after we get back from the break, I'll explain why maybe Tester made the right move. And I realize I've been critical of what appears to be hypocrisy.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
But I have to be honest.
Do I sense egg on our faces here?
A little bit.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll get a spatula and maybe some salt and pepper. We'll be right back. Ask John King over there. I'm Peter Christian. Glad to have you along this morning. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Or, even though Facebook was down for a while, it was not out. And so now it's back.
Yeah. And by the way, I do have posted up there the post that I wrote up this morning after receiving, which is something they didn't have published. They just emailed it to us. So if you want a statement, it's there. Anyway, I asked the question, is this a flip-flop or a smart tactical move? Tell us your thoughts. And I think if I'm honest with myself,
all right,
and if I were John Tester in this position, I would consider voting the same way John Tester did.
Why?
Of course, I would never be in this position because I disagree fundamentally with a lot of John Tester's positions.
Okay, all right.
On Keystone XL, if you really do support, I'm assuming that he actually does want Keystone XL passed, as he has said many times. If you really do want the end goal, right, there's two elements of planning. You have what we call strategy, which is your long-term end goal, okay? And you have tactics, which are the things that you do to get to that end goal. If you have really consistent tactics, almost all the time you're going to lose because other people figure them out and shoot you down. That's just the way it is.
Now,
this is standing in a row in a straight line and getting shot through the trees.
All right, now, you have brought this up many times before with things like the government shutdown.
Yeah,
right?
It was a stupid tactic.
Okay.
Horrible idea. Okay. Anyway, but here we go again.
Right.
And this is, I think that this might be the best tactical move for a couple of reasons. Number one, the votes weren't there. Even he's not the final vote. Even all three of them, if all three of these guys had switched, they wouldn't be the final vote. So it's an opportunity for them to show unity with the president and with their party, and to perhaps corral votes for the real deal. Because there was no way in heck this was going to be the final showdown, okay? This is not going to be the bill that gets to the president's desk, and they knew it. So, that being said, if you do want to actually have the strategy of completing Keystone XL, what do? You corral your members, you get them through probably what they're going to try to do through amendments to side into the bill.
But it's interesting you would say that, because the one thing I did not hear after the pipeline were howls of protest from the Republican leadership saying, you promised, you know what I mean?
Well, you'll probably hear it today.
Well, you know what I mean. What I'm saying is perhaps they all kind of got together and say, okay, well, I understand you're going to vote again. Okay, that's fine. Well, we'll plan forward. You know, and these are why the intricacies of politics have always evaded me like they don't you. Mostly because I think if you're for something, you're for it, and you vote for it. And so if you're for something, you're for something all the time.
Well, this was a filibuster. That's a stall. That means you don't advance today.
All right.
I mean, if you think militarily, and I don't know, maybe it's just the way, maybe it's from playing too much Risk as a kid, which isn't that great of a tactical game. But if you're thinking of it militarily, I mean, some days
I want Kamchatka and I want it now.
I will rule the world from Australia. My devious plan.
I don't know what's the only country I remember from Kamchatka.
It's one of those countries you pull it. You got to figure out what the heck where it is.
Where is this place? Of course, now the world's changed so much, you can't play Risk anymore.
Yeah, so. I actually am hungry. I'll have some Kamchatka. Thank you very much. The tandoori Kamchatka. Anyway,
along with my lesser Antilles.
Some days it's better not to advance. Some days it's better to store up and regroup, and I think that very well could be what he's doing. The other side of things could very well be true.
All right.
He could be holding the bag for a party that does not want Keystone XL. And now that he's in the minority, he's forced to make harder decisions and go back on promises.
And you have to remember, too, that he is in charge of raising money to elect and reelect Democrat senators. Okay? Something that's going to be tougher and tougher as we go. So perhaps he was making, in his view, a strategic move to say, I'm still in the Democratic camp. Okay, I'll still probably end up voting for the pipeline down in the future, but in this particular vote, I'm going to step over on this side and say I'm still a loyal Democrat.
Well,
Now,
and you could be right. For example, California billionaire Tom Stiers, who poured all of that money into the successful Democrat campaigns for last. There weren't a whole lot, but there was a lot of money there.
Okay.
For from Mr. Stiers, almost all of that money, I believe it was all contingent on his push for a green future, basically. And
he's a big climate change guy.
He was against Keystone XL. He was against a bunch of other things.
Right.
Could this be part of a money raising scheme? I don't know. That's the thing that makes me sick as an outsider viewing Washington. Right. I can understand and get into the game of tactics and strategy and stuff like that, but there's so much unknowns because so many people are talking that we don't ever hear as the public. There's so much money and influence and stuff that, I mean, you can't even see most of the game. Most of the game is being played under the table. It's like you're at a blackjack bar in Vegas and they have different cards.
or the classic smoke-filled room where deals get made and things happen, and then all of a sudden the doors open and how come you voted that way? Never mind. Trust us. You have to trust us. We know what we're doing.
I voted for working families.
I know. I'm fighting for working families.
Well, you fight them and you work for them and you vote for them.
That's right.
Working families have it all.
Unless they want to work on the pipeline, then forget it. Anyway, we're going to take a break. Now, we have an interesting week this week. It's kind of going to be bits and pieces of the Montana World Affairs Council on the Radio week.
It is. So I'll just tell you why. So on Wednesday, we were working to get an imam. This is our
own smoke-filled room.
This is a pretty important imam. He happened to have been the one involved. I think it's Faisal Rauf is his name.
Okay.
He is the imam for. Do you remember after the World Trade Center fell, they were considering putting a mosque?
Yes,
not
close
far.
by. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That's the guy. This is the guy that was on the TV talking about why America should be behind the building of this mosque.
And he's agreed to be on our show.
He has, and one of his push is I think it's called the Cordoba Institute is the name of his organization, and he's pushing for unity and understanding and peace among religions and things like that. He's one of the lesser. Or he's certainly not one of the most outrageous voices from the Islam community.
Has he spoken out vocally against the radical violence of ISIS and Boko Haram and all these others, the brutal killers and killers of children? And that's, I mean, has he spoken out against them?
I would be absolutely surprised if he hasn't, but I don't know. I haven't followed him that closely.
We're gonna find out. Anyway,
so that's that. That's the reason. Well, anyway, so I asked Bob, because it looked like I was going to have this giant hole in my schedule for World Affairs Council. So I asked Bob, "Hey, Bob, could you do some work for me? Because now I have this big window of opportunity, and all my guests are falling through." Well, guess what? I look for some guests, and Bob looks for some guests, and we each get all of our guests. So now I have a week of just stacked with guest after guest after guest. Great conversations, I'm sure. And our next great conversation, we'll be talking about, I believe, international treaties and the internationalization of law.
We've got a very special guest here in the studio. Actually, guys, I was listening to the show on the way in. You guys need a big hug. And I brought John Tester, into the office because you guys were really needing a little bit of love here. So
it's harder
John,
to get
welcome.
than a bigger hug than John Tester. That's pretty close. That's almost as big as it gets in the Senate for a hug.
Yeah. I have had the occasion to meet John a few times. I will try to ask him, but I don't know.
Well, as long as you're not kooky, Bob.
Well, that's your problem.
Don't be.
You guys
kooky.
are crazy.
Tell you what, we're up against a break.
Call it for what it is.
He's throwing us under the bus.
I'm gonna roll the bus back over.
Thump. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. We got folks in the studio. We're talking Montana World Affairs Council. We've already made fools of ourselves a couple times, but that's, pretty much par for the course. Anyway, John King's over there. I'm Peter Christian. And, of course, our good friend Bob Seiden-Schwartz joining us here in studio. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good to be here.
Now you have a guest standing with you who's actually taller than you. So
we are both stretching to the max here.
So Peter and I feel like
we're manning up. Okay. Brothers with different mothers.
Anyway, so please introduce our guest, if you would.
Yeah, we've got James Wingard. Thank you, John. Remember that? Wingard.
Wingard.
Yes.
There's not an E at the end, so it's not Wingard.
Yep. And I had several months ago, I got an introduction. We were down at a stock farm club. We had a group of guests down there, and I started talking to James, and he has a very interesting business background and a little bit different subject, but this is very broad-based because as it relates to Montana businesses and global business as far as it's called Legal Atlas. Okay. And I'm going to let James do an introduction in terms of what the business is. How did it start? Who is he? What's his interest and background here? So welcome, James.
Thank you very much, Bob. Where to start with Legal Atlas?
Let's start with you first.
Okay.
Tell a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what are you doing here in Missoula?
All right. Originally, I'm from mostly Oregon, I would say. I was a Navy brat growing up.
Well, he's tall enough to be partially born in Washington and partially in Oregon, so I could see that.
Right. So I was actually born in Guam, and we moved around when I was a kid. My dad was in the Navy, and we ended up in Oregon. And I did college there, and then eventually I ended up going to law school. And not quite right out of law school, but pretty close, I ended up getting a job in Mongolia, where I went supposedly for a single year and ended up staying for 7. And then when I got done with that work, I came back to the United States.
Please tell me you were a horse archer.
Yes, I was.
Yeah!
I was a horse archer, and you got it.
That looks so hard.
My secret
so
background.
Really, what were you doing in Mongolia?
Well, I was working to help them develop a lot of the new environmental laws, working on a biodiversity project with the UN. And in particular with their national park system.
Really glad you brought that up, because the one thing we hear about China and in that area is that, oh my gosh, they're building a coal-fired plant on every street corner because there's billions of people. They need power. They're becoming more urbanized every day. More people moving out of the agriculture area into the cities. They need a better standard of living. So, and you were just talking about biodiversity in this area and in a way of developing energy without having to use fossil fuels, I'm assuming.
Well, we were looking, pretty much at the national park system. Okay. We were looking at how they were managing water. I mean, all of these things, of course, are connected. And in Mongolia, it really wasn't a problem of urbanization. And the issues with mining for coal, et cetera, that didn't happen until a little bit later.
Okay.
The coal fields hadn't been discovered. But it's certainly a big issue. And it certainly does involve a lot of the water rights, et cetera. I just haven't been involved in those issues since they've come up.
Gee, water rights.
Water rights.
What do you know?
Where have we heard
Are you
that
involved
before?
in the Montana CSKT Water Rights Compact?
No, I'm not.
Have you been to Xanadu Stately Pleasure Dome?
I tried to prepare for these questions, and I'm finding that I really didn't know how.
We're going to send John out for coffee.
I would say I'm embarrassed,
so the
but I know
grown-ups
these guys too
so
well.
the grown-ups can talk.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
John, is there something you want to tell us about your relationship that we need to know here?
I'm a big fan of Mongolia.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when did, getting back on track here, when did you leave Mongolia?
2001.
Okay, so if you go back to that, you would see now vast changes in terms of, especially the resource development.
There was, tremendous changes. Absolutely.
They're literally building cities in the middle of nowhere in order to be able to mine the various resources in cooperation with China. China is providing rail systems, but it's an amazing story when you think about.
Now, let me ask you this again. I usually ask the stupid everyman questions because that's who I am. Okay,
something about Xanadu, please.
Is Mongolia part of communist China, or is it a separate country, or are they? How are they tied together?
It's a separate country,
okay,
and has been for a long time. So
lots of not love between China and Mongolia.
Yeah, completely different place, different government system.
So if with all these developments that they're making, where is that energy going? Obviously, it's not all being used in Mongolia; it's being exported.
No,
right?
it's I don't know exactly, but primarily it's for the export market, and certainly the majority of it is going to China.
Okay. Yeah. So as Bob had said, sometimes it's the commercial thing that brings people together out of necessity, right?
Absolutely.
So okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So after that, you went where?
After Mongolia, I came to Montana. I'd been out of the practice of law for about 7 years, so I took the bar exam here in Montana and became a lawyer and started doing private practice here in Missoula. But after working internationally for so long, I had obviously a knack for it and a love for it. And didn't find too many people in Montana that needed a lawyer with Mongolian language expertise, quite frankly.
Although it's good for bar bets.
It's really good, yeah.
When that big case comes.
When I'm ready, when it happens.
Tell you what, we're up against a commercial break. We're going to come right back. We're having a great time with James Wingard, and he's going to be staying with us here and talking. This is the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. We still haven't found out yet about Legal Atlas, so we're going to get to that when we come right back after this. Thanks for joining us here on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. That's John King. I'm Peter Christian. Joining us in studio, it's Montana World Affairs Council on the radio, and we have a lot of fun on this show where we learn a lot of good stuff, too. Bob Seidenschwartz joining us, and James Wingard, and legal director of the Legal Atlas. So we haven't even got to the Legal Atlas, so why don't we do that, Bob?
Yeah, so James, you come back, you're practicing law. Where did this idea for Legal Atlas come from? Was it in existence, or did this come from your fertile mind in terms of what your interest in what you were doing?
Well, Legal Atlas itself didn't exist yet, and that wouldn't happen for a few more years after I came back to the United States. But it was something that was really born out of all of the experiences, and experiences that I made after that. I worked in Afghanistan for quite a while. Starting in about 2006.
So I have to ask you, what brought you to Afghanistan?
Same kind of thing. I was always doing legal development work. Mm-hmm. So my job basically was to go in and work with a particular ministry to help them develop a legal framework for a given resource. In some instances, it had been in the past things like national parks. It had also been mining or forestry.
And James, I gotta ask this because this is important for the audience to understand. When you're talking about going into a foreign country and helping them develop a legal framework, explain what the significance and importance is in terms of both capital investment, relationships with the larger global community. Help us, because we in this country, it's almost like we take law for granted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So give us some insight into the importance.
Well, we also assume that there's some sort of legal framework extant in this country, and perhaps you have to start building from scratch some infrastructure, right?
Those are a lot of different questions, and let me see what I can do.
We'll take them one at a time.
Take them one at a time. But basically, there's always a legal framework in place. I mean, there really isn't such a thing as a culture in a country that doesn't have law or a legal framework. It's a foundation for how we operate as a society.
But you have to adapt to it.
But you've got to adapt to it. But our perspective really wasn't to go in and try and change what their legal system was all about. It was to look at a particular resource, not from a legal perspective, but first from a management perspective. You're looking at mining resources or forestry resources, and you're looking at all of the individuals, the businesses, the governments that are involved in managing it, using it, becoming involved in it in a commercial sense or otherwise. And the legal framework is basically the response to all of those various needs. And it wouldn't come into a single piece of legislation. It could involve changes to the land law or to the forestry law or whatever is necessary.
So you said something that caught my attention. You're going into a country, there isn't a place that doesn't have some legal structure, you just mentioned. But what were the challenges that you had in terms of cultural? So you're going into a country like Afghanistan. They've got some legal structure and framework. Are you bringing a Western perspective in terms of the legal framework, or did you have to adjust that and adapt that in some cases to the culture and the history?
Oh yeah, the primary goal was to adapt and adjust. We were when I mentioned that we would look at things from a resource management perspective, we start there because that's the thing that would be the most common In other words, if you're going to manage this resource, it really doesn't matter what the culture is. The resource itself has particular needs. After that, of course, you're really looking at what the culture is about, how the legal culture and how the personal culture, the social culture would actually respond or be able to interact with it. So yeah.
This is going to sound really dorky, but anyway, I'm going to bring it up because
nice setup, John.
If you were in a college debating environment, this is one of the things you'd hear. You would hear something along these lines. This is soft imperialism. This is the West imposing its values and its structure on the other parts of the world that don't necessarily abide by that structure, and perhaps to its own fault. And so my question for you is, first off, what was the setup for getting you into Afghanistan and Mongolia? Like, are they coming over and saying, hey, we want one of your big Western people to come over and fix our country? Because I doubt that's what it was.
Yeah, no, there was an advertisement in the local newspaper saying, anybody over 6'4", please.
And they shot it at your door?
Yeah, and exactly. So, yeah, okay. So soft imperialism. I suppose one of the operative word might be imposition, whether you're trying to impose a particular Western idea. And the truth is there's no escaping bias. If I come from this particular culture and this particular legal expertise, I'm bringing that with me, obviously. But by the same token, I'm working directly with individuals in that country, and I'm not going to be able to bring anything that they're not actually going to be interested in seeing to some extent. So, there's a pretty big filter between what I think and what actually gets written, and then ultimately what gets approved, because we would be working on these things at the ministerial level, and in some instances, often in many cases, those things would then have to go to the Ministry of Justice for a review, and then on to the Parliament.
So is this, we're dealing with minerals in most of these cases, right, I assume?
No, you're dealing with agricultural resources of all types.
Okay.
You're dealing with what might be considered natural resources, but also in many instances from an agricultural, from a local community use perspective.
But these are things that other countries also have an interest in, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Specifically, so the need is there because the want is there.
The need is there. The need is there in many instances because the communities that live in and around those resources need to be able to use them. They need better access rights, and those things are sometimes missing. There's larger conservation concerns. There's other commercial concerns. So
yeah, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back. We already have a caller that wants to ask you questions. By the way, if I may say, without embarrassing you, you have a marvelous voice. And I'm thinking if this whole lawyer thing doesn't work out, come see us in radio, okay?
Okay. No.
So this is a real compliment.
We're going to be right back with more of Talk Back in a minute. What your voice reminds me of are the voices that do the international news programs and start. I mean, you have a very rich, deep voice.
You have a great voice. Yeah. We should get him and Josh. You guys are fired. We'll get Josh and James. Josh who I work with. Josh has a great radio voice. Josh, Denny. He's just got that real nice.
Well, you know what they say.
Resonance to
when
his voice.
I used to teach in Japan, and they would talk about the dialects of the West. You think about it when you hear it from the South, or when you hear Bob talk. But most of the time I don't hear much dialect in Montana. But there's this swath of America that goes back to that. Yeah. And it is called the television dialect. And the television dialect is what we are comfortable hearing on the nightly news.
Well, and they've had people that had accents that had to lose their accents in order to be able to work.
I have clients. I do commercials for radio stations all over the country. Okay, and I have one client in a little town in French Camp, Mississippi, a little gospel station, and I get a call from one of the 80-year-old salespeople named Miss Helen, and she say, Peter, can you do a spot for me? I need it in like 20 minutes, and it's got to go on the air in the baseball game here in just a few minutes. Can you do that for me? And so I said, what? I mean, I'm in Montana. Why is it? Well, we like you because you don't sound like us. All our ads sound just like me, and we don't want that.
immediate marketability.
Their English language program had people all over, so Australia, England, Scotland, New Zealand, and the girl that I was in this one community with, I was like a traveler. She was a Kiwi, and when I came, we understand your English.
So when we come back, this was the kind of conversation I was hoping we'd get into, because this has so many broad implications.
Yeah.
Soft imperialism.
I want to get Catherine's call in. Catherine will have at least 2 questions for you, and she's very erudite. You'll like her. She's very, very good. She's smarter than me and almost as smart as John. So figure where that scale is. Oh, you told us that. Ah. Hey, we're back on Talkback, 721-1290, and we've got James Wingard joining us. He's the legal director of the Legal Atlas, which we really haven't gotten into yet, but that's okay. We will, and we have a caller already. Let's get Catherine on the line. Catherine, you're on with James. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, James.
Good morning.
Okay, who pays you, and how is Atlas funded in the first place? Is it nested within the U.S., or is it a multinational nonprofit advocacy group? Do you take assignments from other than national government systems and such as businesses? Is the UN involved at any level, being that there's an impetus towards a more global legal structure to aid ease of business and environmental interaction?
Okay.
Catherine, is there a question?
and what's your favorite color?
That's another multi-part question. I've just pulled out my pen because I wasn't ready for those. Let me see.
Who funds you? Where did you get your money?
You know, we got started originally here in Missoula with some funding from the University of Montana. We also got some support from a local technology company called GCS Research. They were instrumental. The Montana Department of Commerce also was a contributor in the beginning, and since then, basically, it's been primarily self-funded. Myself and my wife, who's the co-founder of Legal Atlas, we've both been the ones that are supporting it, and we're moving into basically contracts with organizations, not the UN, that are interested in putting together a database of laws for a particular topic, and right now that's the model that we're following, and eventually we hope to be able to make the service available to businesses.
Okay, so but then you are a nonprofit.
No, actually, right? It's designed to be a public-private partnership, so kind of a social entrepreneur idea. So part of it will have a for-profit end, but that hasn't yet been initiated.
Okay, so when you reach out to these groups, or groups reach out to you, then they pay a fee for your services, right?
Basically, what we're doing is a fee to set up a database, as well as they're paying essentially for the consulting expertise that we bring to the study of law on a global scale.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
great.
Catherine. See, that wasn't so tough, was it?
No, actually, it was easier than I thought.
So, James, you mentioned a couple of organizations just a minute ago. What was their impetus or reasons behind wanting to get involved with Legal Atlas?
Okay.
In 1 minute, if you don't mind.
In 1 minute.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take a particular example. There's an organization called Global Initiative that's going to start working with us here very soon, and they're really all about transnational crime. They're basically one of the things that we need to get after is an understanding of how crime is handled from a country-to-country basis, so that when we engage in understanding transnational crime, we've got an easily accessible database of the laws.
Does that have something to do with child sex trafficking, things like that?
It can, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll start with environmental crime to begin with, but it can go into all of these areas.
Yeah, because there have been several seminars about that at the university.
Peter, this is where James and myself met originally, was that we had that seminar, not seminar, but that conference on global trafficking.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break. We have another hour to spend with James Wingard. We're just, if you will, mining the surface of what's going on with the. How's that? Pretty good, huh? No extra charge for that, by the way. The Legal Atlas. We will continue after our top of the hour break. Welcome back to Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. John King, our venerable show producer. We've got Bob Seidenschwartz over there, and we've got James Wingard with us, if you will, the founder of Legal Atlas. We have a Facebook comment. Is that right?
Yes, we do. This is from Kitty. She asks, with the new agreement with Cuba, what are the foreseen outcomes for both the U.S. and Cuba? Do you think this is favorable to both parties?
That's an excellent question, but I think it goes a little bit outside my expertise. I mean, I don't know.
So a lot of people, when they think of international law, it's certainly having a boycott on a country or not allowing travel would be part of that, right? Or not?
Yeah, that would be. I think that the approach with Legal Atlas is fundamentally different.
Okay.
One of the things is not to get involved in the political discussions, because those really are political discussions that get imbibed.
So you want to be a lawyer that doesn't get involved with political discussions?
Believe it or not.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Well, no, the idea is, it actually goes to what Bob and I were talking about yesterday a little bit, is, Legal Atlas is designed to provide an objective resource so that you can take a look at what these laws say, whether you agree with them or not.
So you're the dragnet of the of the legal world. In other words, just the facts, man, right?
Well, basically, the idea is that if you take, and it's to look at it on a topic by topic basis too.
Right.
So we're not going to be necessarily involved in everything that's out there.
Okay.
And forming opinions on what should or shouldn't be done in some instances.
So what would you say are the because it's such a big. I mean, this is a big fishbowl. This is like counting the number of fish in the ocean, right?
Right.
So what would you say are the expertise? What realms of law would Legal Atlas? You've already mentioned environmental law as one of the major ones. What other things do you take apart and look at and dissect?
And we're responding to what other organizations are interested in too.
Okay.
And part of that reflects, the hot topics, if you will, on a global scale. So one of those, of course, would be transnational crime, and different parts of it. So it could be human trafficking, cybercrime, environmental crime, and so with each one of those is what we'll be doing, is going after that topic.
Could you describe to me, if you will, outlay what is environmental crime? Are you talking about a power plant that fouls a river across the border,
right,
or
exactly,
what?
Yeah.
I mean, what is that all about?
It's actually a number of different things. In our first approach, what we're going to be doing is just looking at the criminal statutes across the world and seeing to what extent those actually contain either individual provisions or paragraphs or chapters that define that exact term. So the answer is we don't have the answer yet in the sense that compilation has never occurred. But it also goes into other areas.
So James, would this be an example of environmental crime where you have fishing, where you have different countries competing, and in many cases these trawlers take tremendous amounts of resources from the sea and others' territories? Would that fall into that realm?
That would fall into that realm, absolutely. It would be really any area where the laws of the country have defined a particular violation as a criminal violation.
Now, in years past, in times past, in eons past, or ages past, this would have been solved by conflict, by armed conflict, by wars, by invasions, by, you're taking our fish, we're going to kill you, or we'll just invade your country and take, you see what I mean? And so I think the way that we have advanced now is we go to court and we can get it straightened out with laws that people can understand. And so we avoid that armed conflict that has caused so much trouble in the world. Now,
Please communicate these new modes of operation to Putin and ISIS.
I was going to say, I'm not so sure that that's true.
I'm just asking.
I think that resources are fundamentally still at the heart of conflict.
All right.
And they'll be at the heart of armed conflict for the foreseeable future, I would assume.
I'd like to ask a meta question. So when we talk about law and the future, do you see the world moving towards a system of laws that's consistent? Or do you find that when you're you're talking about specializing in each different region of the country, you've been to Mongolia, you've been to all these different places, do you find that each country is developing more niche laws and getting further away?
No, I don't see them getting further away in that sense. It's a hard question to answer really very well because you kind of have to know absolutely everything, and we don't.
It is like a big,
and we don't. But from my own perspective and what I've seen is frankly, the laws that we're looking at are directed at these resource issues, and within those, there's a tremendous amount of commonality, simply because the resources themselves demand it. In other words, if you're looking at mining, there's going to be particular things that they're going to have to address in terms of how that resource is allocated, accessed. So almost every country has a form of exploration and exploitation mandates within its legal system. And frankly, those commonalities are much greater than people imagine.
It seems to me that another big problem you have is right now we have all these different countries, right? They each have their different sets of laws, but we also have a tool, the internet, that allows us to not be in one country necessarily. It's almost like a different world. And you can have a web address from a different country. You can run it through a router in a different part of the world. And it seems to me that's going to be super complicated and maybe super interesting for someone that specializes in this kind of law.
Absolutely. And we've had definite interest in that, in understanding exactly what the implications are for businesses and for privacy purposes too. What does it mean when you operate a business on the internet? But what about intellectual property here and in many other places?
All right, we're going to take a break. We have all three lines open, by the way. If you have a question or a comment for James Wingard and Legal Atlas, we'd love to hear from you. 721-1290 is our number, or 1-800-568-5309, or you can ask your question on Facebook. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks for joining us on this Tuesday edition of Talk Back. It's always a pleasure to have Bob Seidenschwartz and his guests with the Montana World Affairs Council. James Wingard joining us, Legal Director of the Legal Atlas. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, as you're setting up these legal systems, be they in existence or improvements upon, they're only as good as the integrity of the entities to enforce. And in many of the countries that we're talking about, corruption is just ubiquitous. So what has been your experience in terms of being able to kind of align the fact that you can come in and say, look, we've got this legal structure, but when you've got such power and corruption held by a few, that's got to be a major challenge.
It is a challenge, but I think the bigger challenge is to get people to understand that it's not just about corruption. That what you really have to do, first of all, is understand exactly what's going on in the legal system, to understand whether the law actually touches on what you're looking at or not. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that well, but oftentimes corruption flourishes in an environment where there's actually a legal gap or where there are conflicts in the law.
So how does, from, again, your experience, how does the populace respond to this? Because this is a part of the problem solving, not just enough to come in and let the legal entities or scholars know what you're trying to do, but doesn't the population have to be involved in this to have some ownership to the point that you just made in terms of that gap, when there's that gap, and it's that gap between those who know and those who don't?
Right, yeah. We very definitely are interested in that input from the community level, really from all levels, in terms of what the law needs to do, where those gaps really are, and basically there's corruption for certain, and in many instances it is ubiquitous and it's very difficult to deal with. But a lot of times we label something as corruption when what's really going on is an absence of a regulatory environment to prevent it. Yeah, or the overarching legal framework to prevent something from happening. Or in other instances, there's conflicts that allow somebody to say that they are doing something legally when one law seems to clearly prohibit it and the other one permits it.
But what happens when the system itself is corrupt? And we can talk about Russia and Putin, where we know Russia has a well-established legal system, but the power of a few to corrupt that system for their own interest and ends is very problematic too. It
is problematic. And one of the things that we hope to do with Legal Atlas is really to simply make this information so much more accessible to people. It isn't about Legal Atlas doing all of these things. It's about other people actually being able to get into and understand what their systems do and do not do, so that they know where things are happening or should happen.
Since you're comparing and contrasting laws across the globe, what do you find are the realms that that most countries are in most agreement on? So obviously, I guess it seems to me there's going to be things that we're going to have a lot of conflict with. Countries are not going to want to give up sovereignty for certain issues. But other things, I think trade being one of them, you're going to find quicker agreement on. A lot of the world is in a free trade agreement with the United States, for example, right now. And I think that's going to progress, and more likely more countries will be under that umbrella in the future. So what are your thoughts? What are the things that the world is united on, and what issues does the world have the most difficulty with across those country borders?
Does this guy know how to ask simple questions?
No.
Or no, he doesn't. Okay,
No.
good.
What's your favorite color, James?
Blue.
And thanks for coming.
Exactly. What are the countries most united on? I suppose once again I have to speak from my perspective, because I can't answer it all. But it seems to me where the more transnational the interest that's involved, the more agreement I tend to see. And I wouldn't say how that all necessarily comes about, but when you have, businesses or systems where it really truly does involve pretty constant, exchange between countries, there's a tremendous need to make sure that those legal systems actually harmonize to an extent. So if you're looking at, let's say, the medicinal plant law of Afghanistan, you're going to be maybe in a very niche, legal environment, if you will. But if you're looking at customs and customs enforcement, there will be differences, but there will be a tremendous amount of harmonization simply because it is a transnational legal framework. It's designed to say this is how things come in and out of our country, and it's how we interact with other countries in trade.
Well, and James, the EU, in theory, is an example, and in practice, of what you're describing, the ability to kind of to smooth out the playing field so that all countries are able to do business without having to deal with each independent country's particulars.
Yeah, and the EU, of course, goes much, much further because it actually has an authority to establish that harmonization. So
they don't have to deal with particulars like Greece or anything like that anymore.
Well, they do now.
Yeah, exactly, they do now. So.
Right now, I guess one question that I'm sure that some of our listeners are thinking about when they think about this legal atlas and their minds begin to understand what it's all about. Is there any possibility that what you're investigating or what you're building could be used for some sort of global governing system at some point in the future?
Dun dun.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just throwing it out there. So.
I think it's a long, long, long way from anything like that.
Okay.
A global governing system isn't really a function of the collection of laws in the countries around the world. That's a political decision.
That would be a no.
That'd be a no. That'd be a long no on that.
Okay, all right. Just checking.
Yeah.
What parts of the world do you see making the most progress in this front? It seems to me you've done a lot of work in. I don't know, I guess I would call Mongolia almost like a second, not third world country, but not quite up with the first world countries yet. But I mean, you've done a lot of work in countries that are kind of moving. And I'm curious, where do you think that the most progress is being made on this front?
It's actually a really good question, too, because I think there's a lot of countries where...
There's a good question.
Yeah, he got a good question for me.
Was that one simple enough? I don't know.
Finally, it took him a while.
He gives me a number for each one of these. I got a 9.5 on that one.
Yeah. There's a lot of countries, I think, where the legal system itself just has tremendous need overall. And so obviously in those countries, a lot can be done. But I would also argue that just about everywhere there's a lot of progress that can be made. Because really the idea that a legal system is, perfected is never true. We're always learning something new. There's always new challenges. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with today are global in scale when you look at things like wildlife trade. And if you're thinking of law as a management tool, you're really saying, well, how do we adjust the laws to respond to these new developments? And in that sense, every country really can make improvements.
1 minute to break.
Okay, I'm going to ask the mean question.
All right, here we go, the mean question.
Where,
not about Xanadu.
No, it's not about Kublai Khan's stately pleasure dome. I want to know what America's biggest failures are when it comes to these types of laws. Where are we being outpaced by other countries? Because you said every country, so I'll hold you to that.
Hang on to that question. We'll be right back after this quick timeout. See, we had to set them up and give them a chance to think about it. We'll be right back. Talkbacks rolling right along here. It's 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. It's the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Of course, John King is over there. Bob Seidenschwartz. Hi, Peter Christian. We're pleased to have with us James Wingard, the legal director of the Legal Atlas. Now, John, you just asked a question, so if you would restate it, and James will take a shot at it.
Yeah, James set up this question basically by saying that every country in the world had, realms of law that they were behind in, that they needed to work on, that they could show improvement on. And I wanted to know what he thought, after comparing and contrasting laws from all over the globe, what he thought the U.S. was the furthest behind on, where we could use the most work.
Well, once again, I'm not going to be able to say which one is absolute the worst one, that we need to work on. But, we know... We
can have a top 10 list if
you
you want.
Top 10 list. We know, of course, that there are some topics that are of tremendous interest right now. And one, of course, would be wildlife trade. How do we handle...
I've heard you use that expression at least 4 or 5 times during the show. And so if you would, for those of us who are unlearned... Well, talk about wildlife trade. What exactly is it? I mean, aside from I found a tiger, I want a tiger in my backyard.
That'd be part of it. Yeah, okay. It would be all forms of trafficking in wildlife, and that could include wildlife that's taken directly from the wild, or wildlife that's traded from zoos, I suppose.
Breeded in captivity.
Yeah, captive breeding programs, things like that. And it's a tremendous issue right now. I mean, we're looking at the destruction of elephants across their range states in Africa and the rhino, and we're looking at
is it primarily because of extinction problems?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it's increasing levels of trade that are tied to the major transnational crime issues. So basically, we're looking at wildlife trade as simply one more component of illicit trade overall, connected to trade and human trafficking.
So when you say this is an issue for America, is it because Americans are going over and taking the wildlife from other countries, or is it because we're doing this sort of activity on our own country, or both? Or
well, wildlife trade occurs everywhere, but you might think of it as being an issue for the United States and for every country because transnational crime. It's connected to transnational crime overall. And that transnational crime is feeding, not just the crime syndicates themselves, but the armed conflicts and a lot of the things that everybody has an interest in working on. Stability in the world is important, period.
I know Bob had a question.
One of the things that when we had the conference on human trafficking, that came up again and again in terms of that theme. And I don't think people understood the multiple connections in terms of transnational crime to terrorism, to drug trafficking, to animal trade, because somebody is generating this money that then, of course, is going to places that has the ability to keep turning that over in ways that are, of course, less than legal. But where are some of these markets? There's always got to be a market for that particular usage. So in the case of animal trafficking, is Asia involved? Because we hear about rhinoceros horn and various things that are used for male potency, as an example. So there's got to be an end user
not
here.
All of us are on those same websites.
Not at your pleasure palace in Mongolia, John.
Wow.
Where you may have experienced that.
We're doing our best to try to keep that touchstone of the pleasure palace.
Exactly.
It just keeps coming up.
I wasn't expecting that to be a thing today.
Coleridge.
What was the question, Bob?
The question is, where are the markets?
Where are these markets? Because there's got to be a market for this to exist in the first place.
Right. There's definitely there's some websites out there that are tracking where those markets are, and I think a tremendous amount of the market is also in Asia for things like ivory. Of course, that market has grown exponentially with the rise of economic power in Asia itself. It has always been part of their culture, to admire and to have ivory as a relic in their home, but that's just grown to the point where the resource that provides it, of course, can't support it.
I think people in this country would be genuinely surprised to know that there is such a market worldwide for this illegal trafficking of animals.
Yeah, I think that the estimates are somewhere around $19 billion a year in trade.
What about us as consumers here in the U.S.? Is there anything we can do to elevate our education and understanding? So if you're going out and making decisions of purchases, how can that be, How can that have
Don't buy any more
effect?
rhinos, Bob.
If you happen to be in the market for rhino horn, don't do it.
They got other substitutes now.
All we need is for the world to be less concerned about male potency, and we would solve a lot of these problems.
Okay, yeah. But anyway.
So, there's a lot of resources on the internet. I mean, you really don't have to go very far to find out what kinds of products are in fact illegal and what's going on. I mean, the internet, of course, is a tremendous resource for that.
I'm just looking at the paper that Stacy wrote up, all right, and it describes pretty much what you're doing, but then there's an open-ended thing at the end here, and I'm going to bring this up.
Okay.
And when we get to the end, I'll take a break, and then you can answer, okay?
Okay.
So we'll set you up. Here we go. It says, L.A. builds on existing online legal information and focuses on a missing piece of the puzzle, the creation of a one-stop window that, boom, okay? And we'll talk about that when we come back. He's nodding his head. Yes, I got that one. We'll be right back with more in a moment. Hey, this is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Special guest in the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio, James Wingard with Legal Atlas. So I'll just go over this question again. Legal Atlas builds on existing online legal information and focuses on a missing piece of the puzzle, the creation of a one-stop window that does what, James?
That cuts through the chaos in global legal information.
Okay.
In other words, today there's no lack of legal information sites on the internet. There's at least 70,000 or 100,000 or who knows how many. But the problem is that those things are organized differently, very differently from one jurisdiction to the other. And they're in all kinds of languages, obviously, and they're organized primarily for a legal professional public. In other words, the topic headings and the way the laws are sorted are really designed to be available and of use to the practicing lawyers in that jurisdiction. So if you're interested in a topic like, since we keep bringing it up, wildlife trade, and you're interested on a global scale, your only real resource at this point is to go to a Google search. You type in wildlife trade and whatever country you want to name, and you'll get 1.5 million returns.
Right.
And at that point, you really don't have any idea what you need to look at, what's real, what's not. And most often, you'll never find what you're looking for.
Do you find that it seems to me that you're almost kind of like a babble fish from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that the little fish that translates all languages? Like, you're kind of like that for law.
Okay.
Is that wrong?
We're going to use that in our advertising.
Okay.
Legal Atlas, the Babel fish of law. I suppose in a way, because the idea is that if we can make it a little bit simpler, but we're not trying to do absolutely everything all at once, and we just take a single topic, then the job is doable, and you can actually begin to translate, the key content, if you will, of these laws that go from place to place.
Now, you worked in Mongolia. You've worked for the German government. You live in Montana. Your wife is from Spain.
Yes.
Obviously, language has been a big part of your life.
Yes.
When you look at laws, do you see them kind of pyramiding into English? Do you see these laws being, okay, here's what we do in English, now we translate it into this other country's dictums? Are you fine? Because when you look at other things, for example, I used to work in Japan. When you look at the way that PCs are designed and the way that the handbooks are written for your copier or things like that. I mean, English was ingrained in a lot of some of the basic mechanics of everyday life. Do you find that happening with laws as well?
Partially. Well, obviously, we're doing a lot of research in law, and we're finding, which countries and which languages are being translated into English, and which ones are not. And it's certainly not universal. There are countries, that let's say Thailand or China, where they don't have a lot of expectation that people in the outside community will understand their language, and so they do translate them, and they translate them into English because it's necessary to connect, if you will, in the international level. But there are other countries, where Spanish is the language, for example, or French or German, and those are not being translated. So no, not really.
James, what about the nuances of language and culture? As you know, being a language person, there's quite a bit of difference of what can be said in somebody's language and how it's understood versus ours. So has that been a challenge, or are you able to kind of leapfrog that from a legal standpoint?
Okay, well, using the Babelfish technique, I think we try and leapfrog it a little bit. The idea with the legal atlas is not necessarily to get into every interpretation that's possible and every single nuance. At that point, once again, we would kind of be lost. There's too many questions to answer.
Here's an easy one question for you. This is from Frank on Facebook. He wants to know, what sort of network of academics, institutions, or individual researchers or contributors does Legal Atlas have around the world?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Frank, you're hired.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I lost my job, guys. Welcome, Frank. He's coming into the studio today.
Yeah. The Legal Atlas approach is very much designed to be kind of a wiki approach, but a vetted one. So we have had a lot of student researchers, and they've been from a lot of them from here in Montana and also in Canada. But we've got students that are collaborating with us in all kinds of countries. I think we've had as many as 70 different researchers from around the world. We've started what's called a Legal Atlas chapter based at the Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. We're also looking to start another chapter based out of Guadalajara, Mexico. And we're open to starting chapters pretty much everywhere. The idea is that, we've created the system, we're creating this platform and the approach, but we want as much input from literally around the world as possible. So, and the organizations that we're beginning to collaborate with are also based in other countries.
What country exports the most experts in your field?
Exports the most exports in our field.
Okay, so you're a guy that you were born in Guam, you lived in Oregon a lot of your life, it sounds like, and then you end up in Mongolia working for the German government and other places. So obviously, they didn't have a German guy to do your job, right? Or they didn't have the Mongolian guy to do your job.
There are German guys and there are Mongolian guys.
You're stealing the jobs that Germans just won't do. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody wants you, James.
I've got no idea.
Nine American.
When it comes to doing international legal development work, there's a lot of people out there, with all kinds of backgrounds. No easy way to answer that.
But you don't find that particular countries are sending a lot of individuals in this field?
There's no, we're not publicly traded good yet, and so I don't know of any particular statistics. When we get there, I'll let you know.
Okay,
we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. We still have 3 lines open. If you want to ask a better question than John, we'll be right back with more with James Wingard in just a moment. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday edition of Talk Back. It's the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. James Wingard joining us with the Legal Atlas and brand new organization and just really opening up brand new doors all over the world. But Barry is on the line. Barry, good morning. Hi.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Barry.
Hey, I tuned in a little late, so forgive me if you guys have already talked about this. But, James, do you see Sharia law having any growing influence, especially in those non-Islamic countries?
Sharia law having influence in non-Islamic countries? Well, that's actually a really good question. And I think that there's definitely, some talk about that. But I don't have, any particular statistics to tell you what's actually happening.
Well, let's put it this way. In your experience, as you've gone around the world, have you had to work within that framework?
I absolutely have. And it's been... it was one of the primary concerns that we had when we were working in Afghanistan. And you talked about, adapting to the local cultures, et cetera. We had to work very, very closely with local communities to understand where that interface was. Sometimes, though, really some of the issues that we're dealing with aren't embodied in Sharia law itself. There may be some overarching principles that we have to work with. There might be some ways of doing, decision making in a legal context that are important, but some of the natural resource management issues that we were concerned about didn't find a home in Sharia law.
What sort of, you said some of the overarching principles that would come up. What are those, and how were they different from what you would typically deal with in the United States, for example?
Well, there's so many different principles, and I'm not an expert on Sharia law, so it's not going to be possible for me to talk.
Just in the milieu that you worked, when you said it had come up, some of the overarching principles.
Right, exactly.
What did you interact with?
Well, we interacted, with women's rights issues when it came to accessing natural resources. We interacted with the decision-making bodies, and how those things were structured.
How was it received?
It wasn't that we were trying to propose something. We were basically there to learn how they did it and what it was that they required. And then we would basically try and make sure that those things were incorporated into the more formal legislation. So it was really more a matter of recognizing what they had and what they would then be comfortable with.
So you weren't jumping into Sharia law saying, here's how you need to change and modernize and that sort of thing.
No, not in that particular instance.
Okay. Barry, anything else?
No, I was just kind of curious. I hear a lot about the influence of Sharia law, and I was just kind of wondering if there was any crossover into what you're trying to do there, James. But thank you.
You bet. Thanks for the call, Barry. Appreciate that.
Peter, I would add to that if you look at most of the, in the case of the Middle Eastern countries, their legal system still has different levels of hierarchy in terms of dealing with international issues, domestic issues, where Sharia tends to be more of a social compact.
Exactly.
Now, what could be interesting is if more fundamental radical Islam actually takes a ownership of a particular landmass.
So it becomes a theocracy.
And implements that type of mentality. That may have some different consequences, but that's speculation on our part too.
Right now, yeah. And it would deal with things like inheritance and women's rights and criminal penalties and things like that. So, and there's a broad world out there that doesn't have much to do with those particular issues.
We've talked a lot about environmental law and also about criminal engagements across country lines. But one of the things that has popped up for me, as I had mentioned, we had lived in Japan. Many of my friends married Japanese women while we were over there. And I believe you've married someone from another country as well, so this might pop up in your life. But issues of adoption and civil law between countries are very different. Do you get involved in those discussions, or is it mostly just criminal?
Well, the legal atlas as a concept is open to any topic, but in order for us not to get lost, basically we're only engaging in things when we have a very strong partner organization that's interested. So far, there's not been somebody that stepped forward and says, you know what, we'd really like you to go after an assessment of adoption laws around the world. It's certainly doable, and we would be very interested in doing it.
I happen to know that there are the people who are in our church are very interested in pursuing adoption in Asian countries, and they have run into all sorts of opposition and because they don't trust America, don't trust our culture. Even though these may be very nice people, we don't want to send this child into a culture that may be opposed to the way our country thinks and lives. And so is that, taking up with what John said, is there any way that the legal atlas could be used as a clearinghouse for information for these countries to say, hey, well, okay, this is what America does and it looks good to us, so there isn't, we can maybe break down some barriers.
Possibly, as far as the legal information is concerned, certainly. The cultural differences and concerns and fears, etc., maybe not as easily, obviously.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Legal Atlas is intended to do is not only put those laws in place, but also to put in place the other information that's related to the implementation of those laws. Because law itself doesn't live or exist in a vacuum. And so we use a GIS system, so a geographical information system, on purpose because through that we can associate all kinds of additional information. So if you were looking at adoption laws, you could be looking at adoption figures, and you could be looking at all kinds of additional information that's immediately available through this map interface. So it would tell you not only what are the key elements in the law, but it would also tell you and what's happening a little bit more on the ground.
So you'd be able to see these things side by side and be able to compare and contrast.
You'd just be able to click from one country to the next.
And the nice thing is it isn't a judgment level where this is good and this is bad. It's just this is and this is and this is.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we're going to come right back. 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Stay with us. 721-1290 is the number. We still have the 3 lines open and about 8 minutes left with James Wingard joining us here this morning with Legal Atlas. Now, let's boil this down to right here in River City and to the Big Sky Country here. Specifically, what are you doing here in Montana? Seriously, that we could jump into and really relate to.
Right, exactly. Well, there's a lot of points of connection here in Montana, and one of them is just starting for us now, where we're beginning collaboration with a Bozeman-based company that has a platform called WealthView. And basically, it's a decision-making support tool for the state of Montana that would help decision makers at various levels understand, what is it that we have of value in this state, and it's not just sort of an assets aggregation system, but also looking at intangibles. And one of those intangibles, of course, would be the legal environment. What do we have that really works well for us here in Montana? And the idea is to work together with Legal Atlas, and we would use our methodology and our system to help put in place a way of understanding the legal frameworks in that context. So
now let me ask you this, and I realize when you first came, we kind of threw something at you about the Flathead Water Compact, okay?
Right.
Which you don't deal with. However, you do deal with treaties, okay?
We do put together international treaties. That's correct. Yes.
So and much of the consternation and conflict that has gone through this it would be with the 1855 treaty, which gave primary rights to the Salish Kootenai tribe, and from thence we go on to what we have now. And so, is there anything in the legal atlas that we could use to understand treaties better and understand how they're formed and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. We have a portion of the platform that's dedicated to the compilation of treaties that would relate to a particular topic. So if you're looking at water rights or something else, all of the relevant treaties would be there. And one of the other areas that we engage in is a compliance assessment or a comparative assessment between the content of a treaty and what else is being reflected in the national legislation that applies. And in there is pretty fertile ground for understanding where there are gaps, conflicts, and overlap.
You had said earlier that what drives a lot of what you're able to focus on, because it's such a big picture, is who's interested and in what. Who is interested and in what?
Who is interested? I think right now the list is about 26 different organizations.
Okay.
And they range in size and shape, I suppose. Global Initiative is one. WealthView is the Montana-based one that I talked about. Another one called Social Media Exchange. They're looking at cybercrime. The World Resources Institute has been working with us on environmental impact assessment law worldwide. The list goes on and on. I could list them all out, and it might be a little long for this show. But there's been really no shortage of interest. It's really a matter of us at this point, getting the funding together to complete the platform itself and make it go live.
It sounds like almost all of these are private bodies.
These are mostly nonprofits, but we have interest. Just not last week, but the week before, we were at the State Department briefing them on what Legal Atlas is and talking specifically with the customs and enforcement individuals.
How was the reception?
It was tremendous. They looked at it as a major improvement in their ability to engage with other countries, particularly when it came to illicit trade. They needed to understand how and what powers were available to their counterparts, if you will, in these other countries, so that they knew how to interact with them.
Did you tell the State Department how to buy plane tickets to France?
We did. As a matter of fact, yes.
It's apparently very cool.
Oh, boy.
That's plane ticket law is the next topic we're working on.
So,
Go ahead,
James,
Bob.
at this time, who is your competition in the business market, if at all?
Well, we're obviously not the first company to say, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a global set of laws out there? And there are some that are long-standing. There's Brill is a publishing company, and they have an online set of laws, a global database. Another one's called VLEX. It's a company based out of Spain that's also doing that. But as far
Legal
as
Atlas is such a cool title, though.
Yeah, we're so much cooler.
They can do legal lawsuits.
Yeah. But one of the primary differences is that we're trying to attract the market that isn't the legal professional market. So in some of the others that are our competition, if you will, really they're once again organized for the legal professionals, and all of the way that they set it out follows. And ours, of course, can be used by legal professionals, but it'll also be available for businesses that want to do due diligence. And do their own research maybe before they call up the expensive attorney and pay him $500 an hour to figure out what's going on.
So how long do you plan to stay in Montana? Or is this a jumping off point, or are you based here? Or
for as long as they'll have us, and they haven't kicked us out yet. So I haven't got my Montana passport, but I applied 10 years ago, so I should get it soon.
So we have about 3 minutes left. So what if you could give us just an overview of Legal Atlas, how we can contact you, and how our audience could benefit from what you folks are doing.
Okay, yeah. So Legal Atlas, of course, is available. You can see what we're doing on the internet if you go to legal-atlas.net. That's our main site. We've got a beta, not a beta, excuse me. We've got kind of a prototype platform that we've developed while we go through reiterations of it at this point. But all of our contact information is available online. Okay. And when it comes to what we can do for Montana, the door is open to explore. Obviously, the company Wealthview is one of those. And we've had conversations that haven't yet really matured, but the idea of using a Legal Atlas approach right from Montana when it comes to problems that go between states, for that matter. In fact, that came up at the Human Trafficking Conference, where enforcement personnel were saying, we'd really like to know, frankly, what it looks like in Idaho. And that might sound a little simple, but it's true. That getting information on a trans-jurisdictional level, even within the United States, is a service, and that businesses here and enforcement can use it.
Well, James, at that conference, one of the things that came up, it wasn't that many years ago that there was not a national data bank for the police.
Exactly.
So you could get arrested in California, and they wanted you in New York, and they didn't have the information that you were wanted.
That's because law enforcement jurisdictions are horribly proprietary.
Well, and this is part.
And we've parceled out the world, and we manage it effectively like a puzzle. And the reality is that only that is within the puzzle. The fact that we've created a jurisdiction. Everything else we do is trans-jurisdictional. Our businesses, our lives, etc., they run between all of these different places. And so, with more and more movement available through the internet, virtually or physically, all of us really need that level of information.
We just want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having us.
I hope we haven't pestered you too much.
No, it's been great. I loved it. Thank you.
Let's work on that Golden Pleasure Palace thing.
Yeah.
Okay?
It's a stately pleasure dome.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm
Decreed
sorry.
by Kubla Khan.
Okay, so what's coming up tomorrow there?
We will be speaking with an imam from Manhattan. He works at a mosque there, and it should be a great conversation. And we'll also have a lot of open phones.
All right, 721-1290 is our number, and Montana World Affairs Council Week, pretty much, is what we'll be doing this week. And again, we appreciate James Wingard, and thank you so much to Bob Seidenschwartz for bringing him along. There you go. And you can drag him kicking and screaming because he doesn't want to leave the studio. So you guys have yourselves a great day, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning, bright and early at 6 o'clock for Montana Morning, and then talk back at 8.